Today, we're doing something really cool. We're distilling some absolutely fascinating research on the hidden mechanics of how we teach, how we learn, and really, how we become who we are in the classroom. We spend a massive portion of our lives inside educational systems, yet we rarely step back to examine the invisible forces driving the actual people standing at the front of the room. So we're going to unpack the architecture of a teacher's mind and discover how their deepest beliefs are actually formed.
Okay, let's dive into this. Picture a 9-year-old girl. Right in the middle of her 5th grade year, she decides she wants to be a teacher. And the funny thing is, she can't point to a single lightning bolt moment of inspiration. Instead, it's an accumulation of these tiny, almost imperceptible details. It's the way her teacher deliberately pauses before answering a question, signaling that the student's thought genuinely matters. It's the strange, quiet pride of finally grasping a really difficult concept. It's even the sensory stuff. The warmth of the classroom radiator and that universally nostalgic, slightly overwhelming smell of winter chalk dust. Basically, she's internalizing the profound feeling of a classroom long before she even has the vocabulary to explain it.
Fast forward, she carries that exact feeling with her for 20 years, through university, her training, those terrifying first days on the job, all the way to becoming a veteran educator. It just becomes this deep, unquestioned current running beneath literally everything she does. She looks in the mirror and thinks, this is who I am, the teacher. But, and here's the magnificent catch the research highlights, that identity, which feels so incredibly solid and intimately her own, wasn't actually something she actively chose. It just kind of happened to her. It was shaped by role models she absorbed as a child. And the wild part? That version of teaching she internalized was formed in a world and an educational era that literally no longer exists.
So, the crucial point is, what do we actually mean by identity? It's a word that gets thrown around a lot in motivational speeches, often just becoming a vague buzzword. But the data demands precision here. Teacher identity is not a job description. It's not a checklist of competencies. It is the conscious or unconscious answer to 3 massive questions every teacher carries into the room. Who am I in the space? What am I fundamentally here to do? And what do I actually believe about learning and young people?
Those underlying answers dictate absolutely every micro-decision made during a school day. Seriously, everything. It dictates how a teacher reacts to sudden silence. It determines whether they lean toward tight control or open trust. It decides whether they view a struggling student as an annoying problem or as a fascinating invitation to teach differently. You are never going to find this identity written in a lesson plan. Yet, 2 teachers can teach the exact same lesson from the exact same textbook and create entirely different experiences for their students. Why? Because the difference isn't the content, it's the person standing in front of the room.
Let's move to and see how this built, because this identity doesn't just magically appear on a teacher's first day of work. It's constructed in 3 distinct layers: the earliest layer, the institutional layer, and the lived layer. Understanding this structure is absolutely vital. You can't rebuild or improve something if you can't clearly see how the foundation was poured in the first place, right? So let's look at how this happens. We begin at the foundation. Layer 1 is what researchers brilliantly call the apprenticeship of observation. Long before a teacher ever stands in front of a class, they spent thousands upon thousands of hours sitting in one as a student. This layer is the deepest, and dangerously the most invisible. During these thousands of hours, future teachers are constantly absorbing what authority looks like, what a good lesson feels like, or even just the sheer existential dread of being randomly called on when you don't know the answer. They carry these mental images of the teachers they admired, or the ones they feared, and they unconsciously reproduce those exact dynamics decades later.
Right on top of that foundation, we add Layer 2, institutional training. This is the layer provided by formal education, universities, and the school system itself. Now, it's definitely more conscious than that childhood layer, but it brings its own heavy baggage of assumptions. It drills in frameworks, professional norms, and usually a pretty heavy emphasis on content delivery, classroom management, and strict curricular compliance. This layer fundamentally shapes how teachers draw the boundaries of their job. It tells them what they're strictly responsible for and what falls entirely outside their paycheck.
Finally, we reach Layer 3, the lived experience. This is the layer that's actively being built right now, day by day, lesson by lesson, student by student. It's every class that soared, and frankly, every class that crashed and burned. It's the years that felt like profound professional growth, and the years that felt like sheer, desperate survival. This is definitely the most personal layer, and honestly the most painful to examine. Because it doesn't just hold a teacher's proudest accomplishments, it also holds the things they've quietly given up on over the years.
The wild thing is, most teachers are never invited to deliberately examine these 3 layers. As the research brilliantly frames it, Teachers live inside these layers the way a person lives inside a house, without stopping to examine its foundations. It's such a powerful spatial metaphor. Think about your own home for a second. You walk on the floors, you open the doors, but you rarely think about the concrete poured in the basement. But if the floor starts to slant or the door stops closing, well, suddenly you have to look down.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the bridge between what we see and what is hidden. Every visible teaching behavior is really just an expression of a deeper belief. Take a super common classroom behavior, a teacher talking for the vast majority of a lesson. Beneath that visible action is a hidden, unexamined belief that their primary role is simply to transmit knowledge and that students are passive receivers who learn best by quietly listening.
Or consider a teacher who rarely calls on the quiet students in the back of the room. What hidden belief is driving that? Well, it's often the unconscious idea that learning is entirely the student's responsibility. If they aren't speaking up, the teacher just assumes silence equals consent or understanding. The behavior isn't malice at all. It's literally the physical manifestation of an inherited philosophy.
And hey, it works for the positive behaviors too. The visible action of staying after class to help a struggling student, that stems from the profound hidden belief that human relationships matter and that a student is a complex individual, not just an empty vessel waiting to be filled with facts. Crucially, there is absolutely no moral judgment here. Everyone carries inherited baggage. The real work is having the courage to look at these inherited beliefs clearly and decide, hey, which of these actually serve my students today?
So now we hit the absolute highest stakes of this research, the line between stability and rigidity. Identity naturally tends towards stability, and honestly, that's a feature, not a bug. Stability is what allows a teacher to walk into a chaotic, difficult room and not mentally fall apart. It saves them from having to rethink thousands of exhausting micro-decisions every single day. But in a rapidly changing world, that essential stability can tragically calcify into rigidity. When identity becomes rigid, a teacher loses the ability to adapt. When a new teaching method fails, a rigid teacher doesn't just see a failed technique, they perceive it as a direct threat to their personal identity. They defend outdated approaches because abandoning them feels like destroying the very professional self they've built their whole life around.
Because of this intense tension, there is a threshold of choice that almost every educator hits, typically somewhere between their 5th and 15th year in the classroom. The accumulated weight of repetition and exhaustion forces a fork in the road. Path 1 is closing down. This is reducing the job to just mechanical repetition, collecting papers, submitting grades, and quietly dropping the expectation of change. And we really have to validate this. It's usually driven by sheer exhaustion, not laziness. But Path 2 is opening up. This means bravely asking those uncomfortable questions, examining those foundational layers we talked about, and making the deliberate, difficult choice to rebuild on stronger ground.
And this brilliantly illustrates what it takes to survive long-term. Ultimately, the educators who truly thrive in today's complex world aren't the ones who lack an identity. On the contrary, they are the ones whose identity is robust and secure enough to comfortably hold uncertainty. When they face a new technology like AI or a new generation of students that just doesn't respond to the old methods, they don't panic. They can confidently say, you know what, I don't know how to do this yet, and that is not a threat to my worth. For them, the unknown isn't a danger. It is simply the next frontier of who they are becoming.
To wrap up our dive into this research, I want to leave you with a challenge. Whether you're a teacher, a leader, or just a lifelong learner, think of the teacher who influenced you most, positively or negatively, when you were young. What do they truly believe about students and their own role? And if you dig deep into your own foundations, how much of their unexamined belief is still living inside the way you teach, lead, or learn today? Take some time to reflect on that. It might just change everything.